Picture this, a newborn's first cry echoing through the stone halls of Sparta, not as a sign of life, but as a test. The child is lifted into torchlight, naked, trembling, and silent. A circle of old men watches, their eyes like cold knives cutting through innocence. They twist its limbs, examine the bones, check the strength of its grip. If it wails too weakly, if its head tilts wrong, if its back bends imperfectly, it's carried to the cliffside of Mount Taygetus, and left there. The wind howls louder than the baby's cries. The elders turn away, unshaken. This is not cruelty to them. It is cleansing. Because in Sparta, humanity was weakness. Compassion, hesitation, love, all of it was corruption of the ideal. They were building something larger than life, and smaller than mercy. A living weapon, forged not in fire, but in bloodlines. Every Spartan child was born to serve the state before they took their first breath. You belonged to Sparta before you belonged to yourself. But this was not chaos, this was calculation. The state didn't just control the battlefield. It controlled the womb. You see, to create a perfect soldier, they had to first erase the concept of choice. No man chose his wife. No woman chose her husband. No parent chose their child's fate. The council decided who should breed, who was worthy of continuing the bloodline, and who was better erased from history altogether. It wasn't a family tree anymore, it was a breeding chart. Like cattle. Like racehorses. Strength paired with strength. Obedience paired with fertility. The rest, eliminated. This was the first genetic experiment in recorded history. A civilization obsessed with purity long before eugenics had a name. And the terrifying truth is, it worked. For 3 centuries, Sparta produced men so fearless, so disciplined, so unnaturally controlled that enemies swore they were not human at all. But what happens when you strip away love, doubt, tenderness, and replace it with perfect obedience? You get a body that fights like a god, but a soul that dies before the body ever does. Because Sparta didn't just engineer warriors. They engineered the absence of humanity itself. And the question that lingers like a ghost through history is this: did they create perfection, or did they commit the greatest spiritual genocide of all time? Would you still call it strength, if it required the destruction of the human heart? Now picture this: you're a Spartan man, barely 20, built like stone and trained to obey. You've never chosen anything in your life, not your meals, not your friends, not even your words. Every breath you've taken has belonged to the state. And tonight, they'll take your body too. The magistrates, old men in crimson cloaks, gather in a chamber lit by oil lamps. In front of them, scrolls marked with names, bloodlines, battle records. They are not discussing love or loyalty, only lineage. Who was your father? How many enemies did he kill? Was your mother fertile, strong, and unbroken? They match you the way a breeder pairs stallions, by blood, bone, and birth. Your future wife has already been selected. You've never met her. You'll never court her. You won't even see her face until the night she's taken. And when that night comes, it's not romance, it's ritual. She's abducted in a staged ceremony, carried from her home under torchlight, struggling only because that's part of the act. Her head is shaved clean, her dress stripped away, replaced with a man's cloak. This was the first lesson Sparta gave its women: erase the feminine. Become a vessel, not a person. You sneak into her room in darkness. There is no wedding feast, no celebration. Only silence, the sound of breath, the duty of creation. When it's done, you return to your barracks before dawn, back to the men, the drills, the discipline. You will not see her in daylight. You will not hold her hand in public. She will bear your child, but you will not raise it. Why? Because love creates hesitation. Attachment weakens the will to die. Sparta could not afford men who longed to return home. It needed soldiers who marched into death without looking back. So they severed the human bond, the invisible thread that makes us alive, and replaced it with one command: serve the state. Every birth was a calculation. Every life, a function. There was no family, only production units for war. Even the most intimate act, the creation of life, was turned into a ritual of control. That's how they built perfection. Not through glory or courage, but through erasure. The erasure of the individual, of emotion, of choice. And that's where the sickness began, the belief that control is strength, and obedience is purity. A belief that never truly died, it just evolved, hidden behind the walls of every empire that came after. Now imagine you've survived long enough to earn the title of warrior. You've fought, bled, and proven your worth. The state values you, not as a man, but as a resource. Yet in Sparta, value didn't buy you freedom. It bound you tighter. Even in marriage, you were property, not to your wife, but to the system that paired you. If your union failed to produce the right offspring, strong bones, clear eyes, unflinching spirit, the problem wasn't personal. It was bureaucratic. The magistrates met again. Scrolls were opened, names rearranged. Your wife might be reassigned to another man, another breeding partner. No shame. No secrecy. Just policy. Across the city, there's another woman, tall, healthy, fertile. Married already, but to an older warrior, or perhaps one who had proven less capable in the field. The council saw inefficiency. Two bloodlines could be optimized, merged for the sake of Sparta's future. And so it was arranged. You would lie with another man's wife, not for lust, but for the state. The husband, standing silent, might even nod in approval. The ritual was not hidden, it was endorsed. The line between sacred and profane had been erased long ago. They called it eugenic duty. You might call it something else. But in Sparta, morality was rewritten by mathematics. The family was a breeding farm, the bed, a battlefield. Women bore children for men they barely knew, and men fathered sons they would never raise. The state had learned something darkly efficient: control the womb, and you control the future. Control the family, and you destroy rebellion before it's even conceived. This wasn't about lust or power. It was about design. Every generation, refined. Every weakness eliminated. Every bond that might challenge the state, cut clean. And the most haunting part? They believed it was noble. That by breeding out weakness, they were serving divine order. That the gods themselves approved of this biological hierarchy. You see, tyranny doesn't always look like chains and cages. Sometimes it looks like organization. Like order. Like the illusion of purpose. Sparta perfected that illusion, and men loved it, because it made them feel chosen. But here's where you must stop and think. Every empire that seeks perfection must first define imperfection. And once it does, it starts to decide who deserves to exist. Remember it, because soon, you'll see how this same pattern survived for centuries, hidden in schools, militaries, and nations that still whisper the Spartan code: the child doesn't know love. Not because it was taken from him, but because he was born into a world where love was treason. At 7 years old, he is torn from his mother's arms and taken to the barracks, a fortress of stone, silence, and fear. The moment he steps through that gate, his childhood ends. They call it the agoge, the upbringing. But it was more than training. It was a psychological reprogramming, a full rewrite of the human mind. Every boy was stripped of his name, his softness, his self. He belonged to the group now, not to a family, not even to himself. The state became his father. The commanders became his gods. They taught him that pain was weakness leaving the soul. That hunger was virtue. That silence was power. That mercy was death. If you were caught stealing food, the crime wasn't theft, it was failure. Failure to deceive, failure to adapt. They starved you so you would learn to survive. They beat you so you would learn not to feel. Each night, the boys whispered prayers not to be protected, but to be hardened. To stop dreaming. To stop caring. The Spartan boy didn't cry when whipped, he bit down until his own teeth bled. The story was told of one who hid a fox beneath his cloak, and when it tore through his stomach, he didn't flinch. He died standing. That was the ideal. That was the standard. You were not trained to be brave, you were trained to be unbreakable. And that's not the same thing. Bravery is a choice. Unbreakable men have no choice left. They've been emptied. By 18, a Spartan could kill with bare hands. But more importantly, he could feel nothing while doing it. The state didn't just forge warriors, it deleted empathy. It turned the human heart into a weapon, sharp, obedient, and hollow. And here's the darker truth, they knew exactly what they were doing. Because a man who feels nothing can serve without question. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't rebel. He doesn't think. Control the emotions, and you control the mind. Control the mind, and you control the world. The perfect soldier wasn't one who fought hardest, it was the one who'd stopped remembering why. That's the true horror of Sparta. They didn't conquer nations. They conquered human nature. By now, the men were machines, honed, conditioned, and emptied of self. But Sparta's genius, its true darkness, wasn't in its warriors. It was in how it programmed everyone else to maintain the machine. Even the women. Even the elders. See, a system that controls men through fear collapses when fear is questioned. Sparta understood that. So it built a culture where every citizen became both enforcer and prisoner. Women were taught to admire brutality. They sang songs to their sons, not of tenderness, but of glory in death. They told them, "Come back with your shield, or on it." That wasn't poetry, it was indoctrination. Mothers became recruiters. Wives became auditors. They didn't cry when husbands died, they celebrated, because grief was shameful. A tear was weakness. A sob was treason. The same conditioning that hardened men's hearts was mirrored in women's, turned inward, sanctified as duty. The elders, the Gerousia, didn't just oversee politics, they were psychological engineers. Every decision reinforced one message: the state is divine, and individuality is disease. Even art, music, and speech were weaponized. Songs were designed to synchronize heartbeats during marches, rhythm as control. Philosophy was discouraged unless it served the state's myth. Children were told bedtime stories not of gods and heroes, but of betrayal and punishment. Every narrative became a leash around the mind. And yet, there was order. No theft. No crime. No rebellion. To outsiders, Sparta looked like utopia. Discipline. Unity. Strength. But beneath the surface was a society built on suppression, a collective hypnosis so deep that people no longer realized they were enslaved. This is how control sustains itself through generations, not by force, but by rewriting virtue itself. When loyalty replaces love, obedience replaces thought, and conformity replaces conscience, the people police themselves. That's what made Sparta eternal, even in death. Because that same pattern, this psychological architecture, reappears throughout history. Empires, corporations, religions, militaries, all learn the same secret: if you can convince people that submission is honor, they'll enforce their own chains. So when you study Sparta, don't just see warriors, see a prototype. A human algorithm designed to erase dissent from the inside out. And ask yourself this: how much of that code still runs inside you today? Every empire that builds its foundation on control eventually forgets one truth: control consumes itself. And Sparta was no exception. The system they built to create perfection became the instrument of their decay. By the 4th century BCE, the cracks began to show. Spartan men were fewer, weaker, more fearful, not of war, but of anything uncontrolled. For centuries, they'd eliminated weakness through selection. But in doing so, they'd erased diversity, the one thing that allows a civilization to adapt. Every Spartan was a replica of the same ideal. The same mind. The same obedience. They didn't evolve, they calcified. Even their vaunted discipline turned into paralysis. They could only function within the system. Take a Spartan outside his ritual, his barracks, his structure, and he was lost. They had trained men to fight, but not to think. They had perfected the soldier, but annihilated the soul of the citizen. The women too, strong, proud, indoctrinated, began to question. Quietly at first, beneath candlelight and whispers. Because when you've buried emotion long enough, it doesn't die, it festers. The same mothers who sang of glory began to see the truth, their sons weren't dying for honor. They were dying for maintenance. For the machine. The old men, those architects of purity, had forgotten the one law that governs all systems, entropy. Even control decays. Even order corrodes. As wealth grew from conquest, luxury crept in. Gold from Persia, slaves from war, comfort from victory, the very thing Sparta had once scorned became the rot in its bones. The warrior code that once built the empire began to choke it. By forbidding change, they guaranteed collapse. Soon, there were more slaves than citizens. More fear than loyalty. The warrior caste, proud and pure, became a minority. They clung to laws written by ghosts, enforcing rituals they no longer understood. And when Thebes defeated Sparta at Leuctra, it wasn't just a military loss, it was the death of a philosophy. A civilization designed for war died the moment peace arrived. Because when a society teaches men to serve instead of think, to obey instead of feel, it can never survive freedom. Sparta didn't fall to enemies. It fell to its own design, a perfect system that forgot what it meant to be human. Control may win battles. But only consciousness wins time. Sparta died 2,000 years ago. But its ghost didn't. It just changed its armor. It learned to wear suits instead of shields, offices instead of barracks, screens instead of swords. The methods of control evolved, but the blueprint remained the same. Today, you don't see elders inspecting babies by torchlight. You see systems sorting them at birth by numbers, scores, potential. Algorithms track performance the way magistrates once tracked bloodlines. The state may not throw children off cliffs anymore, it just buries their spirits in failure and comparison. The agoge still exists. It's called education. It still teaches obedience, conformity, endurance, but now it rewards quiet compliance instead of courage. Boys no longer learn to kill. They learn to submit. To fit. To forget the sound of their own instincts. The breeding protocols changed names too. They call it social engineering, population control, ideal demographics. The logic is the same: shape the masses, filter the unfit, breed stability. A perfect society built not on individuality, but on predictability. And you live inside it. You wake up in a system that trains you from birth to obey, to consume, to perform. You are told what to want, who to love, when to rest, what to fear. Just like Sparta, you are measured not by your soul, but by your usefulness. The greatest illusion of control is freedom. They've learned to let you choose between two identical cages. To keep you distracted enough to mistake routine for purpose. But here's what the Spartans could never kill: awareness. The ability to see the pattern, to feel what's been done to you, and to step outside it. Awareness is the modern rebellion. The only freedom left that can't be programmed. Because if control is the art of sleep, awakening is treason. So ask yourself, when you obey, whose voice speaks in your head? When you strive for perfection, whose definition are you following? Maybe the real war never ended. Maybe the battlefield just moved inside your mind. And maybe, just maybe, the true Spartan isn't the one who kills without fear, but the one who remembers what it means to feel. This is where the rabbit hole ends. Or where your descent truly begins. Choose wisely. Because once you've seen the design, you can never unsee it.